I created the AI Flash Report with Cursor. The AI Flash Report basically aggregates AI news from across the web. I'm going to give you not one, but 7 different tips that'll help you get more from Cursor. Number 1, scope your project. Before you start using Cursor to code your project, you want to create something called a product requirements document. This is something a developer typically uses, and you'll get a lot more from Cursor or your AI coding tool of choice if you have one. Now you can do all of this directly inside of Cursor. I'd recommend that you pick Claude as your preferred agent for it. So simply select agent and then navigate to Claude for Sonnet. I'm actually going to head over to the web version of Claude so I can do this, but the process is pretty much the same. So I've told Claude it's a web developer and I wanted to write a PRD for a web app that aggregates AI news from across the web. And this PRD should outline what my project does, my tech stack, design and deployment. And you can see Cursor has outputted something that I can put directly into Claude. However, I've also taken this one step further by asking Claude to give me a list of coding and dev tasks to do one by one. And you can see here there are a number of items that I need to do before I can launch with this particular project. Now I can head back over to Cursor and I could just simply create a PRD file and copy the contents in, or I could paste it into the chat and ask Cursor to clean things up. So here's the final version of my PRD file for this particular project. So it's quite a bit different to the initial output that I got from Claude. But I did refine this over time by editing it and by working on it and by asking Cursor to refine it. And this basically outlines everything that this particular web project should do before I actually try to go and build it. I'd also recommend that you create a separate file that outlines all of the tasks that you want to do. So again, you can write this with Cursor, you can write this with Claude, or you can simply write it yourself. And inside of this task list, which I've written or generated with Markdown, it outlines one of the key features for this particular project. And then I can work on these one by one. The takeaway here is that if you break a big project down into small ones, it's much easier to work on it with AI. Whereas if you try and create it all at once, AI is just going to go down a rabbit hole and create something that's unlike what you've imagined. My second tip for you is to set up rules inside of Cursor. These basically act as a type of guardrail. Now the good news is they're pretty easy to do. So when you're in Cursor, simply navigate to Settings, navigate to Cursor Settings, and then navigate to Rules. And now you have 2 options. So user rules are rules that apply to every single project that you're going to open up with Cursor. So basically everything that you're doing inside of Cursor. So in this case, I just have a simple rule. Talk to me like I'm a junior developer because my coding skills aren't great. Be concise and avoid major code changes without my approval. However, I actually prefer focusing on project specific rules. So if you don't have any, if you don't see a Cursor rules folder, just simply select add new rule and it'll add it to the left hand sidebar. So you can see here I have rules for memories, for coding standards, for PRDs, for generating tasks, and also for deployment to GitHub, which I'll cover in a few moments. Now I wrote some of these rules myself, and for other rules I just simply ask Cursor to document what it's done and turn it into a type of rule book. If you need a little bit of inspiration for rules, here's a great site that I recommend you check out. It's called playbooks.com. And if you navigate to rules and then Cursor rules, you'll see lots of different ones that you can use for the front end, for the back end, and for design. So one particular rule that I found useful relates to AI memories. So this particular rule just basically describes how AI should manage and utilize its memory for coding consistency. So I simply copied this rule to my clipboard and then I headed over to my Cursor rules folder. I created a new folder called a new file called AI memory and I pasted the contents in. Now once you've created your Cursor rules, you have a number of options and I would recommend that you change these depending on the rule in question. So you can select always, auto attached, agent requested, or manual. So for memories, I've selected always because I want Cursor to refer to this rule every time it responds to a prompt. You can select auto attached if you want to, or this rule to be referenced when you're working on a specific file. I don't tend to use this as much. You can do agent requested and then describe the task at hand. So I use the agent requested file for my Git workflow. So anytime I'm deploying to GitHub, it finds this particular rule. Or you can use manual if you actually just want to call the rule in your chat by simply typing @ and then type in the file name, and then Cursor will reference that rule before it does something. My next tip for you is to master your GitHub workflow. Now, if you haven't used GitHub much, don't worry, it's pretty easy to use. Basically, you back up your code to GitHub and then you can deploy from GitHub to your hosting provider. It helps with things like rolling back major changes, and also for tracking big changes to your projects. Basically, all the developers use it, and you want to get familiar with it if you're going to get into vibe coding. So basically, create a new repository for your coding project, give it a name, give it a description, and set it as public or private. And then GitHub will give you a link that you can copy over to Cursor to deploy your project. So here's my GitHub repository for one of my projects. And I simply copy this URL in Cursor and I should be able to back things up to it. Now I've asked Cursor to create me guidelines that explain how it should back up to GitHub at any time. Now whenever I make a change to my project, I can simply say something like, can you back up to GitHub or can you push to GitHub as per my Git workflow? And my Git workflow will be able to find my GitHub repository and also factor in a number of changes that are specific to this project in question. At the very least, I'd recommend backing up to GitHub once or twice per day or every time you make a big change, and then opening up a new chat. It's pretty easy to do and it'll save you a bit of time later on if you need to make a rollback because Cursor has gone down some sort of rabbit hole. So here's the prompt in action. Can you back up to GitHub as per GitHub workflow? So it's reading this particular rule that I've created. It's checking GitHub to see what's been modified. It's noticed that there's been a number of key changes and now it's going to push all of this over to GitHub. And again, normally, or this would take a coder a lot of time to do inside of Terminal and will be quite techy. But if you have this workflow documented, it can save you an awful lot of time and an awful lot of headaches. If you go back over to GitHub, you can see the project in question and you can see all of the content that's been pushed from Cursor to GitHub. And at any time, I can just simply click on commits and I can see all of the different versions of this particular project. And I can click into any one of these to see all of the code changes and also to find something that was potentially changed or overwritten. Next up, smarter context management. I find it's best to open up a new chat window inside of Cursor every time I'm doing something new. So when I've backed up to GitHub, I'll open up a new Cursor window for a particular feature that I want to work on or for a particular part of my project that I want to work on. I did make the mistake of spending maybe 3 or 4 hours working inside of a particular Cursor window. And I started hitting connection failed or connection timed out, and also warning messages about the chat context being too long. And I also find that Cursor or the various AI models that I was using inside of Cursor started to get confused when there was too much context and too much information inside of a single chat. So basically, pick one thing from your PRD or from your task list, open up a new chat, find an AI model that you like, and just focus on that inside of your specific chat window. Once you're happy with the changes, push them to GitHub and then open up a new chat window. Next up, test different models for different tasks. So when I'm using Cursor, I'll sometimes use Claude for Sonnet. I find this is great for coding, but because it's a new model at the time of recording this video, it often times out, particularly around 11 a.m. GMT or 9 a.m. in the United States. That's probably because so many people are using it. I also like using Gemini 2.5, but I find the responses can be quite lengthy and long-winded and can be a little bit slower than what I get from Claude. And I don't tend to like the outputs that I get from 0.3, at least not right now as much. I'll also sometimes use max mode, but that is a lot more expensive because it uses much more of your tokens, but it will code a lot faster. So you will need to alternate between the different models till you find one that outputs what you want in a way that you find helpful. And if you get confused, don't forget to switch from agent mode to ask mode. So when Cursor is in agent mode, it's going to make changes to your code base. And sometimes it'll go down a rabbit hole and make all of these changes that you didn't want it to make. So I'd actually recommend that you use ask mode and then explain to Cursor what the issue is and ask it to come up with a few different solutions. So you can read through the output, pick one, and then switch back to agent mode and say something like proceed with this change. So you can see here I was working on a broken issue on the website that I showed you at the start of the video, and it's given me a number of different solutions. And now I'm going to switch back to agent mode and ask it to work on one of these. However, if I was in agent mode the whole time, it would actually go ahead and proceed with all of these changes without giving me a chance to review them. My next tip is to give Cursor as much context as possible. So a while ago, I was trying to connect a website to an Airtable database via the API. So a little bit complicated, but the entire process is documented on the Airtable documentation. So I can simply copy the URL to my clipboard and I can say something like, can you reference, and then paste in the URL. And then Cursor will read through all of the information on this URL in question. And then it'll start to figure out what it is that I'm trying to do. And this will tailor its output. Or alternatively, you can do the exact same thing by just simply using the @ symbol and referencing a file in your project. And giving a little bit of context to your cursor chat before you make changes will help you get something that actually works and requires less QA and troubleshooting. My final tip, which is a bit of a time saver, is actually to work locally on your computer so you can QA and fix issues just before you push them to GitHub. Because sometimes going backwards and forwards between GitHub and your live site, if you have it live, can take up a lot more time. So Cursor has opened up this particular project at localhost 8000, and I can scroll down through the project, see some of the issues, QA them before I push them all to GitHub. So my current workflow is to pick a feature, work on it locally, get it to a state that I'm happy with, and then push it to GitHub. And I find this strikes a good balance. I don't spend a lot of time deploying things, but I'm also able to revert quickly and easily if needs be. Those are just 7 different tips which are helping me get more from Cursor and from Vibe coding. I actually find they work quite well for other AI coding tools, including Windsurf and Lovable, some of which are profiled on this channel. And I'm going to build out an entire playlist dedicated to some of my Vibe coding projects, including the AI Flash Report, which is a news AI aggregator that I built with Cursor, even though I'm not a coder. If you'd like to learn more about these projects, follow along on the playlist. And if you want to master the art of prompt writing, check out promptwritingstudio.com, where I'll give you proven practical AI prompts. I'll put a link to both of those in the video description.